SYS presents Adventures in Online Education.
Welcome, friends. You're listening to SYS Presents Adventures in Online Education. I'm your host, Natalie Conway. Thanks for being here. 2 quick reminders for you. 1, head over to aoepodcast.org and enter your info at the bottom of the page to sign up for the AOE weekly newsletter. It's a little inspiration for your inbox. And 2, check out SYS Education's newest daily podcast, This Day in Education. Learn about important people, events, and inventions that have shaped education in the U.S. You can subscribe wherever you get your podcasts or at thisdayined.org. Okay, today's episode. I am thrilled to bring you a conversation I had with Dr. Katie Novak. Dr. Novak is an internationally renowned education consultant, an author, adjunct professor at UPenn, and a former assistant superintendent of schools in Massachusetts. Dr. Novak has more than 19 years of experience in teaching and administration, a doctorate in curriculum and teaching, and is the author of 8 published books, including the best-selling education books UDL Now, Equity by Design, and UDL and Blended Learning. Katie designs and presents professional learning opportunities both nationally and internationally, focusing on implementation of UDL, multi-tiered systems of support, and universally designed leadership. Novak's work has been highlighted in many publications, including Edutopia, Language Magazine, Motherly, Attitude Magazine, Commonwealth Magazine, AMLE Magazine, The Huffington Post, ASCD Education Update, and School Administrator. If you can't tell, I'm super excited that I had an opportunity to talk with Dr. Katie Novak. Our conversation about UDL and what it means to be a truly inclusive teacher is going to inspire you, even in this year of continued COVID. So, are you ready? Let's learn something new. Katie Novak, thank you so much for being here. I am beyond excited to talk with you today.
Well, thank you so much for having me.
We are going to dive into all things universal design for learning today. But before we get into that, where did your passion for UDL come from?
It was kind of accidental, actually. So I have always been a teacher. I graduated from college and immediately went to get my master's degree because I didn't study education in undergrad. And it was kind of like, why didn't I start with this? Because both of my parents are teachers. And so you would have thought that I would have realized that. Yeah, I was like, I'm not doing that. I'm not doing what mom and dad did. But I've always been a teacher, and I've always loved trying to design something that allowed students to not only have really great outcomes, but also to love learning, to love being challenged, to really lean into that work. And when I first started teaching, students were often kind of separated by a district's perception of their ability. So there were different levels of students all the time. And I kind of tailored my design work and my instruction to whether or not I was teaching what we would call like a lower level class or an honors class. And when our district started moving towards inclusive education, all of us kind of recognized that our skill sets broke down when classes were really inclusive. And I was part of an original pilot that was going to completely deconstruct a lot of separate programming, or a lot of separate programs rather, to ensure that a single inclusive classroom could meet the needs of all learners. And so as a 7th grade teacher, I opted into that pilot and ended up having an opportunity to co-teach a class where there were students who had previously been substantially separate because of either social emotional barriers or behavior concerns or just academic outcomes. And so it was like suddenly a whole new world of, yes, I want to do it. And as a part of being in the pilot, we ended up getting training in this pedagogy, in this framework called Universal Design for Learning. So that was about 15 years ago. And I really thought that I was an educator who was designing to meet the needs of kids. And when I first learned about it, there was almost this little birdie that's like, oh, you're already doing this. Absolutely not. I was not. And as I learned more about it, about how important it is to design in a really flexible way, not so we are making decisions about students learning, but that we're creating an environment that allows students to make decisions for themselves. I not only saw more students having access to the classroom, more students having access to grade level rigor, but students became much more expert in their own learning. That I didn't have to work so hard to try to get them to complete the work, because we moved from a model of compliance to a model that was much more focused on true engagement of we can all revise any work anytime. We can all work together. Like, let's brainstorm how we want to do this project. What options and choices do we need? And I became really passionate about it when my growth scores on traditional measures were just astronomically off the charts, recognizing that I could have a much greater impact on kids by designing this way. And that's when I started really sharing with my colleagues of like, oh my gosh, my planning is more efficient. Students reporting much higher level of interest and engagement, and their scores are higher. Like, so for me, it's not like, why would you universally design? It's like, why wouldn't you universally design?
I love that. Yes, why wouldn't you? And I felt the same way when I started learning about UDL, which was only maybe 4 or 5 years ago. And I was like, oh, I do all this. I think I do this. And then the further you're diving, oh, no, I don't really do much of this. Okay, I have a lot of work to do. And I also really appreciate that struggle or that feeling like the skill breakdown when you go from teaching the group of students you're used to teaching and then teaching a much broader population of students. You do feel like, I don't have all the skills for this, or how do I manage that? So I'm really happy to hear that you got some specific training too, because as a special ed teacher, I know that transition from, well, the kids with X needs go over to that other classroom and that other teacher takes care of it, to now it's my responsibility. Well, how? That's a big lift, and that can be a big change. So UDL definitely isn't anything new. It's been around for a long time, and that shift from compliance to engagement is another thing I hope we'll dive in a little bit more. But for those who haven't heard of Universal Design for Learning yet or aren't sure what UDL is, could you explain what it is? Is it something we buy? Can anyone do it? Is it for elementary or is it for secondary? Do I need specific training from a company? Listeners might have lots of questions like that. Can you explain to those who may be new to the framework just kind of what it is, how they access it, and the purpose behind it?
Sure. So universal design is really applicable for anyone who's creating any sort of learning experience. So it could be early childhood education, it could be pre-K to 12, it could be higher education, it could be corporate training, adult learning, professional development learning. It's really about designing instruction so that proactively you're designing so you have the best chance for any learner to have like an equitable pathway to reach goals. So I love to talk in analogies. So let me first start by talking about an analogy of, universal design is a concept that comes from architecture. Early on in, the 1940s, 1950s, 1960s, we have a lot of soldiers coming home who are in wheelchairs who cannot get into federal buildings because buildings are built with like staircases and there's no elevators. And this architect named Ronald Mace said, this is insane. Why don't we have buildings that were built so anyone can get into them? And he said, these buildings are not designed for everyone. They're not universally designed. So the concept is like, how do I design something that works for everyone? So if we take that analogy to like a dinner party, let's say that I'm going to have 25 new friends over my house for dinner. And my job is to make sure that I'm serving something that will allow all of them to put a plate of food together that's like delicious and meets their dietary needs. I'm not going to just serve like a casserole, like, hey, everyone, welcome, here's a meat lasagna, because I can predict that there's going to be people who have a plant-based diet, lactose intolerant, gluten sensitive, maybe picky, maybe, already ate. So I have to be really clear about what the goal is. You're coming here to have a meal. And then I have to provide options and choices. And I've never been to someone's house where I didn't have some option and choice about like what dressing I wanted on my salad. Or they didn't ask beforehand about like, this is what I'm thinking about serving. Do you want to bring something to supplement it? Because when we have a buffet or when we have a menu where we can make choices, it's much more likely that we're going to have our needs met. And so it's like, how do we design a class knowing that based on variability, we will have students who are language learners. We will have students who have significant support needs. We will have kids who have experienced trauma. We will have kids who are significantly accelerated and are capable of more challenge, but those needs are kind of like a moving target. They're always changing. And so it's about really three things. It's a framework to approach planning where you embrace variability. You embrace the fact that learners are not only different from each other, but a single learner can be different day to day.
Yes, that's a big one.
Yeah, I mean, it's called intrapersonal variability. It's astronomical because traditional schools just separated kids as though they were static and they always need the same thing. And if you get to know them really well, you can give them what they need. And that's not true. So based on if we're hungry or tired or agitated or experiencing trauma or whatever it happens to be, our needs change. So it's about variability. It's about firm goals. Every single learner deserves access to grade level instruction, period, end of story. It's just how do we design that instruction so that it's accessible? It's all about creating an environment where learners have the opportunity and the conditions of nurture and support to self-differentiate their own learning. Students get to make decisions about themselves. And this is possible in early childhood education. This is possible for students with really significant support needs. And I think that sometimes we have kind of these deficit-based mindsets that they're too young or they're not capable or they're not going to make good decisions. No one makes good decisions all the time. And most people don't make very good decisions at first. It's through this process of reflecting on our decisions where we tend to start getting it more and more right. But are we patient enough to value learning about being a learner in classrooms more so than having students regurgitate content? Because in traditional models, we're telling students what they need. They're building like this learned helplessness. They're becoming really dependent on adults. And then ultimately they can't transfer that. So it's like we're not getting the desired impact and we're working way too hard to not have a better impact. So the framework is really about how we sit to plan, not for the students we have in front of us, but for any potential student who we might serve, because the students in front of us are always changing. And, to learn that, honestly, there is no money that you need to spend. There's no curriculum that's endorsed as universally designed. Certainly, there's lots of books that you could read. You could get them from the library. You can buy them. And there's not a specific company that you need to work with. And I would argue that your most beneficial source of growth is actually the kids you serve and their families. Is that like really asking what their levels of engagement are and what barriers they're facing, and then working together with colleagues. And there's lots of different, professional development providers that provide really great professional learning. And I think it's all about this concept of firm goals, flexible means. How much time do you have? How intensive is the support going to be? Who's going to be involved? And then make choices as an individual or as an organization about like, what is the best way for you to learn more about it? Is it a book club? Is it a graduate course? Is it exploration of articles? Is it having a trainer come out? But what I would say is whatever you choose, please, for the love of all that's good, don't let it be a one and done, because we have to commit to this for careers, not a year, not a week, not a weekend. And, I'm a professional development provider. And we're starting to kind of shift the way that we work with different districts, because a lot of districts will call me and say, we want you to do a 1-hour keynote on UDL. And it's like, okay, so tell me how you're going to continue to support this throughout the year. Crickets. And it's like, well, I have clients who are willing to support this. And unfortunately, I haven't figured out a way to clone myself. So I'm going to have to pass until you have a strategic plan for how you're going to support your teachers.
That's huge, because so often, and there's so much research to back up that the one and done PD just doesn't work. There are no lasting effects from that. And if you're going to offer professional development, it needs to be long-term and it needs to be really invested in and thought out. And that's part of the UDL design and thinking of being proactive and saying, okay, we see this need. We want to meet it. We want to meet it well for everyone. What would that look like? It certainly wouldn't look like a 1-hour, one-time deal. So I think that makes a lot of sense. I also really like your idea about a firm goal, but flexible means for getting there. Because that's really one of the tenets of UDL too. Like there's choice in that, and there are different paths to the top and to the goal, whatever it might be. And it was interesting to hear you say how asking students and asking families, getting that stakeholder input can be your first step and can be really a powerful driver of what you do next in terms of thinking about universal design in your classroom. It's become a theme this season on the podcast, actually. Many guests keep saying, talk to the kids, ask the students. The answers are right there with the people in front of you. So use them, no matter if they're kindergartners or 10th graders. And I think that's just really important to continue to think about. I also started thinking about labels as you were talking about interpersonal variability and how, sometimes we label a student ELL, special ed, they have a 504, they're tag, they're gifted and talented, whatever it might be. And those labels can really limit the lens with which we look at our instruction for that student. If we always think the tag student is going to act like what we think a tag student should act like every day and in every subject, we're not really thinking individually about that student. We're going to talk a little bit more after a break about equity and those kinds of things and how that aligns with UDL. Stick with us. SYS is an online management company that takes a different approach. We partner with schools to manage solutions. Whether you are a district adding an online option for students or an online school looking to go in a new direction, SYS Education can help make it exactly what you need it to be, with high-quality products at a fraction of the cost that schools pay to other companies. We are not just an educational consulting company, we are online educators ourselves, and a tech team like no other. Let us help you bring your online school experience to the next level. Find out more at syseducation.org or by emailing info@syseducation.org. Set up your free consultation meeting to discuss how SYS might be able to help your school. All right, welcome back. We are talking about universal design for learning with Katie Novak. When I think of UDL, I think mostly about students receiving special education services and maybe English language learners. That's kind of just my wheelhouse. That's where I've been in the world of education. And my brain goes to accessibility first, like you were talking about the roots of UDL in architecture. And I think kind of in concrete terms about accessibility, but UDL is a lot more than that. Many people, including you, talk about UDL in terms of equity. What is the link there between the two?
So, when we're talking about how do we design something that works for everyone, it's first of all, when I think of equity, I unpack it as kind of 4 different statements. And when I wrote the book Equity by Design with my dear friend and colleague, Marco Chardin, we really unpack equity using kind of 4 different statements. The first thing is equitable access to grade level classrooms. So you can't have inclusionary practices without inclusionary placement. And you can't be a district that's like advocating for equity and inclusion while also really looking to expand these segregated programs. That is what they are. They are segregated programs. And the only reason that's legally possible is because of this least restrictive environment kind of language. But every single general education teacher has the opportunity to make their environment the least restrictive environment. That if I am in a district, my classroom will be the least restrictive environment. And it's not because I think I can do it by myself, as I would collaborate with every special educator, with every language learner specialist, with every adjustment counselor. And I would say, what is happening in your program and how can I make it happen in my classroom? And together we will figure this out and make this the least restrictive classroom. And, when we think about that, the first thing is this equitable access to the classroom. Once you're in the classroom, it's equitable opportunities to learn at grade level. Because I've seen a lot of quote unquote inclusive classrooms, which are actually just integrated classrooms where students with disabilities or language learners are sitting at a table with a specialist or a paraprofessional or a teacher assistant, and they're not getting the same opportunities to learn with their classmates. And then the other 2 are equitable expectations for success in learning, and then equitable feelings of belonging and hope. Is our kids in classrooms where they say, I get to be who I am and be really successful. This teacher knows me. This teacher believes in me. And so when we're talking about like how we're going to design something where everybody has access, everybody has opportunities to learn at high level, everyone feels like they belong, we clearly have to be more flexible about the design. And therefore, you cannot have this equity without this flexibility. And right before the break, you had noted how like silly these like labels are. And I have come to like, my mind is like blown when I think about how we think they're meaningful. Because people will say to me, well, what do you do in UDL for kids with disabilities? I'm like, what? Like, what? Students kids with disabilities are not the same. Like, what on earth are we talking about? Like, when you think about any group of students, their needs are not the same. So it's like, even if you want to get really specific about how does this look for students with autism, think about the spectrum of students with autism and how beautifully diverse they are. But you can even boil it down even more to say, what would it look like for that kid? I don't know. Is he hungry? What time of day is it? Who's he working with? What subject are we talking about? You can't even answer those things. And like, as a mom, one of the examples that I give is we have a very universally designed breakfast at our house. Is that, if we were to say, like, we're going to make a broccoli and cheese omelet for everyone, my kids are going to go to school hungry. Like, they will just not eat it. We put out like a lovely buffet of like, you need to have a healthy breakfast. And like, we have some cereal and we have some bread that they can toast. And we have hard boiled eggs and some yogurts. And it's like, here's your choice, make your thing. Every time I feel like I know what my daughter likes and I try to make it for her, I'm wrong. Every time. She'll be like, I love strawberry yogurt and granola, like 3 days running. So I'm like, you know what? Aylin's hard to wake up. I'm going for it. I know this kid. Ugh, I don't like yogurt. I'm like, yesterday you liked yogurt.
Wait, what? Yes.
That's what I feel like it's being a teacher, right? Is that when we're trying to plan for kids who are always changing, it's an exercise in like absolutely going bonkers. When we instead say, what are our goals and what are the pathways? Even when we're working with a child one-on-one, we can provide options. So, my brother-in-law is a clinical psychologist, and he often works with children who have experienced trauma. And he's like, every child, even if I see them 3 times a week for a year, I give them choices every time they come in. Where do you want to sit? Do you want to stand? Do you want to use one of these activities? Like, so you don't have to look at me. As a reminder, if you're feeling really frustrated, here's like a communication card where you can point to the fact that you're feeling really red. So you don't have to say anything. You always can walk out and go sit in a chair out there. You'll have 1 minute before I check on you. So you can decide if you're going to continue the session. Like, even one kid that he works with like 3 hours a week, he's like, I will always provide those options, because a child should be able to consent to their care and to say that this is work best for me. And I think every child should also be able to consent to their education.
That is so powerful, that a child can consent to what's happening to them and with them in class. That's huge. We don't often think of it that way. We think, the teacher's in control and it is their kingdom. They close the door and what happens in there is up to them because they're in charge, but it's not. It really isn't. I also love, my teacher heart just soared when you said every general ed classroom can be the least restrictive environment, and really should be the least restrictive environment. And that requires, like you said, so much collaboration and so much openness and willingness to be vulnerable in front of peers and say, maybe I don't have the skill set right now to do this. Can you help me? Can you help me get there so that we can be doing this together? That is amazing, and what needs to continue to happen in schools across the country, honestly, even schools that consider themselves highly inclusive, breaking down those silos and those barriers that are created by either who the administrator is for that particular person. You could have 3 different administrators who are the evaluators for a single group of staff members, and that can create a definite boundary. And just having those labels and physically where people are located in the building, it kind of just goes on and on. And I love what you said about needs being moving targets. Because if anyone out there is a parent, they've absolutely experienced what you talked about with strawberry and granola. You're like, that is your jam. You loved that all week. Yeah. Nope, not anymore. And just getting comfortable with that flexibility. And it really makes me think about honing in on what it is that we're teaching instead of the how. So, or what we want a kid to do, and letting go of the how they do that, because oftentimes we have an activity in mind or a project we want to do, and just take that step back and say, okay, it's not really so much about the doing as it is the learning. And what is it I want kids to learn? What do I want them to demonstrate to me at the end of this unit or module? Okay, well, they can get there 5 different ways, and giving them the freedom to fail too, to choose the thing that actually isn't going to work the best for them, because that's genuine learning. And that's what we do in the real world, right? Like we try out careers that maybe don't work for us, or, but to give kids that experience and to let them know that it's okay. You chose to do a podcast for this final product, and that was super fail for you. Okay, maybe next time we'll do something else. You're really good at the written word. Stick with that for now. That's okay. Whatever it might be, just that freedom to try and experiment. That's really, really powerful. I have one final question for you.
Yeah.
Everyone is affected by educators in their life, and I hope that everyone has that one teacher they really remember. Is there one teacher from your childhood who you recall as your favorite?
Absolutely. Mrs. Krause. I had her for 12th grade English, and there were other teachers who I liked and loved even, but Mrs. Krause had the greatest impact on my life by far. And it's because I am a product of a very heavily tracked and leveled system, of which I was always in the lowest level. So there's like CP2, which is like kind of the lowest level, CP1, and then honors and AP. Never took an honors class, never took an AP class, was in CP2 my whole life. And as far as CP2 students go, I was very well behaved because a lot of my friends were just like super fresh and like not, we weren't really challenged, but I was polite. And so my husband and I always say like C's get degrees, baby, because neither of us really committed to being a student, and no one ever required that I become one. So my parents were teachers. The teachers knew my parents. I was always a really good kid. And that was enough for everybody. Is I did anything I was asked to do. I was polite. I got along with people. And so like my report cards were like, pleasure to have in class, C-, pleasure to have in class, B-. I actually got waitlisted from state school when I applied to go to college. So people now are like, oh, like you must have been really into being a student. I'm like, no, I was not at all, which is why I'm so passionate about this work, because I never even had the opportunity to try until I met Mrs. Krause, who at the time was my nemesis. And so I loved her. I
love this already.
I'm in touch with her now, and I'll send her the link to this podcast because she knows.
Yes.
But I was in her like lower level English class, and I had her for drama the year before. And I always did well in like drama and PE. And so I have her in English class. And after like a couple of days, her first assignment was like, I want you to know all the options you have ahead of you. I don't know what you're going to do, but I want you to know how to fill out the application if you want to go into the military, and how to fill out a college application if you want to go into college, and how you fill out a job application if you want to do that. And then, whatever. So one of our first diagnostic assessments was just kind of writing a college essay of like, let's just see what you got, go for the word count, try to come up with something, and then we'll kind of workshop it out. I wrote something about sailing. I don't even know. But I remember that she like pulled me aside and was like, oh my word, so amazing. You're such a strong writer. I love the ideas here. Like it's a little bit raw, but it can get so awesome. I'm putting you in the honors class. And I was like, no, like you're wrong. I'm not an honors student. And she's like, no, I've already talked to your parents. I know that you're capable of doing it. Like you're going to need, like, I want you to go into that class. You might need a little bit of help to like catch up on like some of the conventions things, but like, I'm happy to eat lunch with you. Like whatever you need, you're going to be able to do it. So I went into that class. I don't remember much about the transition, but I know that I did well enough. And from then on, it was like, as soon as I was in that class, I was like, these people aren't any more like smarter than I am, right? Like it was just that they were able to play the academic game earlier, is like they were kind of like flagged as being really capable, really young, and they got the best the system had available starting in 6th grade, and I didn't. And when I was like actually with them, I was like, I can do this work. It literally like lit a fire under me. I did not get into UNH at first, but I did University of New Hampshire. I did get in after the wait list. And I went and I was like, game on, baby. And, I graduated in 3.5 years. I went and got my master's degree. I went and got a doctorate degree. And when I was teaching, I was always like, how am I going to be like Mrs. Krause? So who knows where I would have ended up, without her. And so I wrote UDL Now. And when UDL Now was in its 2nd edition, I actually dedicated it to her and wrote an acknowledgement about like, I'm not sure if you know how important you were in my life, but like, I am now like so empowered to know that teachers can actually change the complete trajectory of a kid by believing in them, by having expectations, by saying, I know you'll be successful here. I will help you figure out how to be. And that was it. Like just that conversation. And so I took her out to dinner and I was telling her like how much she meant to me. And she was like, what did I do? I'm like, Mrs. Krause, what did you do? I was like, first of all, you remembered my college essay. And like, this is 20 years later. And she's like, I do remember your college essay. Like, wow, like it was brilliant. And I'm like, and then you put me in honors. And she was like, what? I'm like, Mrs. Krause. She's like, I literally don't remember that. And I'm like, what? What are you talking about? That changed my entire life. And she's like, oh, sweetie, I thought everybody could be in honors. Like every year, I basically was like, I'm shifting it until all of my students can be. I'm like, oh, I was a lab rat, right? But she's like, no, I knew you were capable. And I knew everyone was capable. And like, I had to show that like anytime I promote a student here, they do just as well as anyone else. And ultimately, she was able to kind of deconstruct those levels. And so hands down, she helped me to believe that I could accomplish anything and that like, you know, I could hang with anybody and I had a right to be there and I belonged. And I've never forgotten it.
That is awesome. Kudos to Mrs. Krause. Thank you, Mrs. Krause, because we're super excited that Katie Novak is here and is who she is and has written what she has written as a result of all of that. And all the other kids, imagine all the other adults right now walking around who might be doing amazing things or whatever they're doing. And it's because of her too, because of her dismantling that.
She is my sister and my brother's favorite teacher also. So we're 4 years and 2 years apart. And when we talk about our favorite teacher, all of us said that like she saw something in everyone.
That is an amazing legacy. Oh, I hope that inspires more Mrs. Krauses out there because that's just amazing. And that's what it's about, right? I mean, that's why we get into education. That's why we become teachers. It's because we want to help kids do whatever they can to the best of their abilities and find that joy in life. So, oh, Katie, this has been such a pleasure in leaving me with all the good feels here at the end. I love it. You have written a lot of books. You are available in many different platforms. If people out there want to get in touch with you or want to find out more about your work, where should they go?
NovakEducation.com. That's NOVAK. NovakEducation.com is where I am. And, you know, certainly you can find me pretty easily anywhere on the internet just by putting in Katie Novak UDL.
Awesome. I hope people do that. I highly recommend it. We'll have links in the show notes to some resources from you. Thank you so much for your time today. It was a pleasure.
It was fabulous to be here.
Thank you for listening to this episode of SYS Presents Adventures in Online Education. Special thanks to my guest today, Dr. Katie Novak. Katie helped us understand that we can embrace variability, give students choices in their learning, and create the least restrictive environment for all students in our general education classrooms. Katie really inspired us, especially with her story of Mrs. Krause, to collaborate with one another and to keep aiming for that ever-moving target that is our students' individual needs. Everyone can do more than we think they can. Next week, I will talk with editor, author, and educator John Warner about writing instruction and what we can do better in the realm of K-12 education to support students' transition to college. Don't miss it. If you liked what you heard today, please hit subscribe and give us a rating. On Twitter, you can follow me, Natalie Conway, at AOE Natalie, and the show at SYS Presents. If you're interested in finding out more about SYS Education, head on over to syseducation.org. This podcast wouldn't be possible without our exceptional team at SYS Education, including sound engineers Natalie Farrell and Matt Duran, and producer Bo Neal. Thanks for listening, and remember, we can learn new things.